Well, her name's Jury. She's 9 years old. And she was so brave because despite the tremendous amount of pain that she was in, she wanted to tell me her story. And we spoke about who she was and what she loved. She loved school and her friends and dancing. And she told me that the last thing that she remembered was playing with this bird in a bird cage at her grandparents' house when the strike hit. And that strike broke bones in her body, and she had massive burns from the explosion that left her with large open wounds that the doctors in Gaza weren't able to operate on.
Tess, Ingram, would you let us know what exactly is your role in UNICEF?
So I'm a communications manager at UNICEF based in the Middle East, and I go to countries around the region and speak to families and our partners and, of course, amazing colleagues about the work that we're doing, but also the situation for children, because children's rights are really under threat at the moment globally, but particularly in the region. And that work has brought me to Gaza a lot over the past 2 years where UNICEF is obviously working on the ground.
So we might well discern from your accent that you're not from these parts, but you are actually Irish. Fully fledged Irish passport holder.
I am an Irish passport holder. My mum is Irish. So, yeah, I consider this my second home.
Yeah, so we obviously, because we're Irish, we need to know straight away, where is your mother from originally in Dublin?
She's from Dublin. She's from Turnure.
There we go. So you come with Irish eyes to situations like this. So when you went to Gaza in recent years, was that your first time there? Were you ever there during what we will, in inverted commas, call normal time?
No, I was never there before. The first time I went to Gaza was January 2024, so in the first weeks of the conflict. And I'm torn about whether I wish I had been there before or not to see what it was like. But also I know that people who hold those memories have found it so devastating, particularly, of course, Palestinians. So I've spoken to so many children who talk about their favourite ice cream shop or where they used to play football. And, of course, I'm not familiar with any of that because from when I was there, it was immediately a war zone.
So you can talk about your experience on the ground, and that's rare because we've had this difficulty for the last number of years, limited access for aid agencies, extremely limited access for journalists from outside of the region. Can you tell us what's it like for you on a daily basis there? What are the sights and sounds and experiences that you come across there? Every
day I go out into what we would call the field. And so I'm not sitting in an office. I'm spending my time in a hospital watching doctors save lives or sitting with a family in their displacement site. And I consider that to be a tremendous privilege because I've had access to many aspects of life and what has happened in Gaza over the last 2 years. I think describing it in a sensory way helps really translate it because it is a very loud place. I think it really struck me when I arrived for the first time, two things. One, the scale of the destruction. And every time I've returned since, I've been to Gaza 6 times over the last 2 years, you see the scale of the destruction increase. And I'm always shocked by neighbourhoods that I used to know being reduced to rubble. It's gone. And then the sounds, of course, you're hearing the sounds of explosions, fortunately less now during this ceasefire, but also of drones overhead. I remember the first time I was in Gaza, I went to a hospital in Rafah, which was a city in the south of Gaza, and it was a hospital under construction that never became a hospital. So it was full of displaced families. As we got out of the cars, there were children sitting playing in the dirt. Where we walked inside, there's drones hovering over the top of us and we could hear the sounds of strikes nearby. And then you go inside and it's dark because, of course, there's no electricity in Gaza. So you walk into a construction site and it's dark. There's a heavy smell of sewage because there's obviously no sanitation system. So you're walking through puddles of waste. And then, of course, there's families living on every floor of what should have become a hospital. There's makeshift shelters, tarpaulins strung up with families living inside, and black smoke on the walls where they're trying to light fires to cook on. So that sort of environment is something that I saw almost every day in Gaza, families just trying to survive in whatever structure they could find.
Yeah, and then the experience of these people, what is that on a daily basis? Are they literally just foraging for food, shelter, firewood, just literally living out an existence?
Yes, unfortunately, for the best part of the last 2 years. We know that, of course, people were being displaced constantly. Almost everyone in the Gaza Strip has been displaced at least once. And, more than 1 million people remain displaced in shelters and sites. So daily existence meant, first of all, trying to be safe. And there is nowhere safe in Gaza. So people were constantly having to move to try and get away from the strikes. And then find food for their children, find some safe water to drink, firewood to be able to cook on or stay warm. And, in the last few months as well, shelter, because it's, the weather there is similar to the weather here at the moment. There's crazy storms and families are living in tents and under pieces of tarpaulin that have been quite easily swept away. And so people are, again, looking for somewhere to sleep.
When you were visiting there, as you said, there was nowhere safe. How safe did you feel and what sort of protection did you have?
We were obviously among the most fortunate because we had a house to sleep in. We had walls and a roof, and we had vehicles, so we can drive around. Those vehicles are armoured vehicles, which protect us from being shot at or from strikes. So was it a safe environment? No, it's not safe for anybody. And there were moments, of course, where we were really in harm's way. But were we safer than 90% of the people in Gaza? We were. And
was it frustrating from your perspective, working for an aid agency, to not see the aid coming in, that you were literally seeing people on the ground in desperate need of food, water, shelter, medicine?
It was incredibly frustrating because that's what we're good at. UNICEF around the world, we support and protect children. We know how to do this job. We know how to bring in aid, scale up services. I don't know that people really understand that our job isn't just bringing in supplies, but it's then turning that into service delivery, running mobile health clinics, vaccinating kids, running learning centres for children, providing protection services. So if a child gets lost, reuniting them with their family and providing mental health support. So some of that service delivery could go on, but not having the supplies to underpin it and also to just meet people's basic needs was incredibly frustrating. And I've seen such a dramatic... I was in Gaza for both of the ceasefires in February and just recently, and you see such a dramatic difference when the aid flows. It's still nowhere near enough, but you begin to see the benefit that it can have when it is moving.
Yeah, and can I ask you your view on the ceasefires? Obviously, they're effective, but they're not 100%. So do people feel safer, or is there still that overhanging threat?
I was there on the first day of the ceasefire in October last year, and there was just this enormous sense of relief among people that, people were saying to me, I survived, it's over, everything's going to be okay now. And then in the weeks that followed that, there was a real sense among people of actually not a lot is changing. I'm still struggling to survive on a daily basis. I have to walk long distances for water and to try and find firewood or something under the rubble to sell to try and get some cash. And of course, we've seen constant violations of the ceasefire. More than 100 children have been killed in the ceasefire hit 100 days this week. 100 children in 100 days. Mm. So families are still struggling. We are still seeing violations of the ceasefire, and unfortunately not enough aid is still coming into Gaza Strip to meet the massive needs, because we're talking, a scale of needs here. Almost every family needs every item on UNICEF's list. Mm.
As you say, people said they had survived. So they'd survived on several levels. They'd survived losing their home, being displaced, not being killed by shelling or bullets, also had survived out in the open, having to find shelter and food. Did you gain any understanding about how are these people actually existing? If there was no aid, there was no food coming in, they weren't able to work, they had no money. How were they actually getting by on a daily basis? Was it literally just trying to scrounge something together from nothing?
It obviously fluctuated over time. And because the borders are controlled, it was like a tap that was kind of turned on and off to varying degrees. So there were moments where people had maybe access to a meal a day. And there were other times during the war where people didn't, and they were eating animal fodder to survive. I remember speaking to a family who were basically eating the hay for livestock because that's all that they could find. And this was in the north of Gaza when it was cut off from the south. And that's why we saw so many children with malnutrition. So it really depended on the time. But yes, I've spoken to families who were eating animal fodder, who were scrounging through waste to try and find food or something to sell to be able to buy what limited food was available.
Yeah, and again on that front, because we saw the level of malnutrition amongst kids. Do you feel that has been addressed at all since the ceasefire, or as you say, has that situation not improved as much as it should have by now?
We've seen the number of children with malnutrition admitted to our clinics go down every month since it peaked towards the end of last year. So it's improving, and that's such good news because we had staggeringly high numbers of children with malnutrition. But we're still seeing, 9,000 children admitted a month, which is too high for a ceasefire. And I think that is the question that I ask myself at the moment is, what should a day look like for a child during a ceasefire? And I think all of us would agree that a child should be able to sleep safely, wake up in the morning and have something warm to drink, maybe some breakfast, have a shower and go to school. And of those 5 things, we've got maybe 2 at the moment. They can probably have a hot drink and maybe something to eat, but they're still not being able to get a shower. Sleeping safely is still in question, and school is not accessible for most children still. So we have a long way to go, I think, until this ceasefire delivers on its promises for families.
Yeah, and UNICEF are very active at the moment in terms of showing just the living conditions on the ground, because these things can drift off the agenda. As you've seen this week, it's all about Trump and Greenland and Davos, and this weekend it'll be about Ukraine, and who knows what will be next week. So is there a concern amongst you and your colleagues that these things just fall off the agenda, and therefore a sufficient level of pressure doesn't become applied, so therefore you don't get progress fast enough?
Absolutely. And I would agree that, there's been, I think, less discussion about what's happening in Gaza because of other global headlines, and also because I do think that there is an assumption that now that there is a ceasefire, everything is okay. And I was just there a few weeks ago, and I can tell you that it's not okay yet, and this isn't over. So we do need to continue to sustain international focus and pressure to make sure that the terms of the ceasefire are adhered to, and that the ceasefire leads to a proper reconstruction process and to lasting peace for children in Gaza.
And is there any concept at all of how long that reconstruction process is going to take, or at least, not fully finished, but at least getting to a point where people have basic shelter and infrastructure?
It needs to happen quickly. I think, realistically, it is going to take time because of the scale of the destruction. Like 9 in 10 homes have been damaged or destroyed. 9 in 10 homes. 95% of school buildings. And so, let's talk about school as an example. Getting kids back to school, we want to try and do that, in the next year, to try and get most of the school-age children back into learning. There's 700,000 of them, and at the moment, we've got maybe 40% in learning. So it's going to take time, and that's not even talking about rebuilding schools. That's just putting up tents and trying to get children back into a classroom. So it'll be a phased approach, and I think that's what's important, is that we do what we can along the way.
Yeah. Because you were on the ground for so long, you must have come across different individuals and different families who's stuck in your mind personally, what reflections do you have on those people?
There's so many. Being in and out for almost 2 years, I think there's so many people who I've met that will stay with me forever. First of all, my Palestinian colleagues are just phenomenal. The way that they've been able to turn up for work every day, despite enduring the same conditions as everybody in Gaza, being displaced, having their loved ones killed, but still working for UNICEF. They're tremendous human beings. And I think this is something that's perhaps not well understood about Gaza, but it's the level of Palestinian ingenuity and community spirit, I think, is one of the things that has kept Gaza going, is the way that people look out for one another. And I think a woman who I'm thinking of when I say that is a mother I met the first time I was in Gaza at the beginning of 2024. Her name's Isra, and she had been displaced with her children from the north to the south. And during that time, her brother and his wife were killed. And so she took custody of his children, which meant I think she had that 5 or 6 children under her care. And I said to her, Isra, how are you going to do this on your own? Do you have a plan? And she said, they're my children now. I will look after them until they're grown and they're married. And I think that sort of story was so common. And I managed to catch up with Isra a few times throughout my time in Gaza, and she was true to her word. She was always looking after this extended family.
You say that in Israel's case, you were able to catch up with her a couple of times during your visits, thankfully. Were there ever cases where you came across people or children in desperate conditions or who had been affected by the war, and you wondered what happened to them?
Yeah, so many. Fortunately, with Isra, we were able to exchange numbers, and I never lost touch with her. But there were others who I wasn't able to reach them anymore, and I don't know why that's the case, whether they're still alive. And there's families that I wasn't able to connect with because they didn't have a phone, and I think about them all the time. There's a little girl that I met, again, early in 2024. She was living in Rafah before the big Rafah incursion of May 2024. And her parents were, I think, out trying to find food. She was with her grandparents when the house was hit by an airstrike. And I met her in hospital. Her name's Juri. She's 9 years old. And she was so brave because despite the tremendous amount of pain that she was in, she wanted to tell me her story. And we spoke about who she was and what she loved. She loved school and her friends and dancing. And she told me that the last thing that she remembered was playing with this bird in a birdcage at her grandparents' house when the strike hit. And that strike broke bones in her body, and she had massive burns from the explosion that left her with large open wounds that the doctors in Gaza weren't able to operate on. And so she was lying in the hospital bed with really large open wounds in a tremendous amount of pain, with an unclear future around, well, if they can't fix them here, she needed to leave. But as we know, the number of children who've been medically evacuated from Gaza compared to the number who have injured is very low. And so I don't know what happened to Juri, whether she got out or whether she survived or whether she didn't.
Okay. Is it your hope that the countries, particularly in the West, who were expressing such concern during the conflict, are now going to substantially follow through with commitments for aid, for medically evacuating people, for providing accommodation now to refugees? Do you think that has been matched, that level of rhetoric has been matched by the reality thus far?
Not yet. I think we need to see real effort now to help Palestinians lead this recovery process. Like I said, Palestinian ingenuity is amazing. And our teams on the ground at the moment, for example, at UNICEF, we're in charge of the water and sanitation systems. So we're repairing pipes, not through the use of spare parts because they're still not being allowed into Gaza, but just through genius and lateral thinking by amazing Palestinian engineers. And so we need to see the international community come to the table, one, to apply pressure to continue to make sure that that work is facilitated and that the necessary aid to enable it comes in. But also, as you say, to open their doors, we need more medical evacuations. There are still 4,000 children who need a medical evacuation. And it's, as we've said, it's going to take time for the hospitals to be rebuilt and to be functioning properly to help children with, major injuries like jury. Unfortunately, now we're seeing less of them, but still children with chronic conditions, cancer, heart conditions that can't get that treatment in Gaza. So, as I said, it's not over, and we still do need that international support.
In your role, did you have any interaction with Israeli officials, and what was that like?
We do. So to get aid into the Gaza Strip, because the borders are controlled, we have to get approval from the Israeli authorities to bring anything in, and also to bring our staff in. So when we want to bring in trucks of supplies, we send a catalogue off, for example, with, even before we load the trucks, what our items are, and we get that approved, and then we get approval for each individual truck, and then they're screened and they go through customs clearance and they go through the crossings. So that's a labour-intensive process where there is a lot of back and forth with the relevant authorities. And then inside Gaza, particularly before the ceasefires, but even now, for movements, we coordinate with them. So we let them know, hey, we've got a car going, there'll be 3 people in the car, their names are this, it'll move along this road at this time, and we get that movement approved. So on the ground, we're also in contact. And the idea of that is that it's us trying to help the parties to the conflict meet their obligations under international humanitarian law to keep us safe. But often what it results in, unfortunately, is denials for missions. So we're told that we can't go, or delays. So we go and we're held at a checkpoint for a very long time and ultimately can't achieve the mission.
You're obviously talking to people on the ground there, but you're also talking to people here. Do you feel there's any misconceptions that we have in Ireland about Gaza and about what's been happening there?
I think I talk to people all around the world in my job. And I do think that within Ireland, there's a very strong understanding for what is happening in Gaza. I think people have been paying attention and truly care about the situation. So I always enjoy my conversations in Ireland. I would say that something I've come to realise is I do think that there's an idea that now with the ceasefire, things are okay. For example, people think that children are back in school, and they're not. Like I said, we still need to get hundreds of thousands of kids back into learning. And we're really focused on scaling that up over the coming weeks. But there's a lot that needs to happen to enable that. We need funding, but we also need to get supplies in. So for more than 2 years now, our education kits, which are basic stationery supplies of pencils and paper and rulers, haven't been allowed in. So there's a long way to go, I think. And so, yeah, we need everybody to continue to pay attention to the situation in Gaza and support in whatever way they can.
Okay. Tess, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.